All right, I am so excited. I did light stalking. I swear it wasn't mean or anything, but I found Elle on, I think it was Threads because
Threads.
oh my gosh, you were giving out such incredible information through your company, which I believe is called MMERI.
Yeah, it's a play on words, M.M.E.R.I Scholars. It's from West African descent. So it actually means victory. So Mary means victory in the Igbo West African language. And it is what basically has inspired my entire business because I work with students and helping them identify the fact that things that happen to them do not have to be painted in a negative light. And I work with them to turn challenges into victories. And so that's kind of where the term was coined from. And then I think it's just honestly just it's just like fate that it also is a play on words of merry, meaning like a happy journey, which is what I really want for all my students.
I am so impressed with how dedicated you are to your students because I was looking through the different stories and you said
Yeah.
something that I used to be a business owner. And when you said I take my recommendations very seriously, it hit my heart. I
Yeah.
need to, I know I have you for such a limited time and I have so many questions for you, but I really want to start with the most important one for this disability community. I had reached out to you because you've been talking about free schools and my daughter or my child has just turned that age. And when we were looking for schools, my child's disabled. And it was so
Yeah.
hard to get information from them. Like I could not, even their disability offices were like, yeah, we're ADA compliant. Everyone who's disabled knows that means nothing. Nothing. So I reached out to you. I was like, hey, do you have any resources? And oh my God, you got back to me in what, 72 hours
I
with
sure did because inclusivity and access and equity are some of my prime values. And one of the core values of my business is just like making sure that students have access. And I think that when it comes to disabilities, when we're talking about equity and access, we're usually thinking about it in like a very demographic or racial context. But there's just way more than that. And I think that I appreciated you even asking that conversation and bringing that up because I was like, this is not talked about. And I kind of posted about this recently. Like, even when you go on the college tours, like, they're showing you all these buildings and like the stadium and they're talking about football games and nobody is really saying like, oh, this is the accommodation center. Like it's not even part of the tour. And if it is, you just kind of walk right past it. And it just really made me start thinking more and more about how like inclusivity and access when it comes to the form of disabilities, whether it's actually seen or not seen, not really a conversation. It's not like the top combo during a tour that colleges are selling themselves on and like getting money for. So I just felt like it needed to be addressed. And one of the things that I really wanted to spend time on providing for families.
and I want to get to how much time you spent on that list because I was so
Mhm.
impressed. I do want to point out something really quickly before like someone turns off. I was like, I don't have a disabled kid. My kid doesn't have neurodivergent issues. Why? Well, I don't need to listen to this. Yes, you do. Your kid could go to a football game and slip and end up with a broken ankle. Do you want your child to
Yes.
miss out on 2 semesters?
Yeah, and that factor also came out too because one, the resource also identifies general holistic mental health. So I do include campuses that prioritize mental health services, whether it's included in your packages, the money that you're paying as part of the health center. So that was also included. And it also kind of came from my own personal experience. So when I was an undergrad, I had to get knee surgery because I hurt my knee playing volleyball on campus. And I hurt myself at school and I then had to get surgery. And because I was like, obviously, school doesn't stop, right? So I went back to school really quickly after having surgery, and I literally had like a cast boot on my leg and crutches. And I lived in a really old dorm, and I realized after my injury that my dorm was one of those buildings that was so old that it didn't have to be ADA accessible. And so I remember using my crutches to hop up over 25 stairs to get into my building, which had an elevator, but to get into the building was an issue. I remember doing all the paperwork to like get the handicap services that was going to drive me around the campus, like to my classes, which was fine. But then when I would get to my class, I couldn't get into my class. So like I went to the University of Georgia, which was a really huge campus. And like my classes were like in the stadiums, right? And so like I got to my chem class, my van drops me off, but I can't get into the stadium to class. I have my backpack, my crutches. I'm like hopping. I don't know if I should keep one crutch or keep my backpack. And people are just kind of looking. And then I get into class and it's like the top of the stadium and there's no seats, but I can like go down. So the whole experience really just made me, I remember being so angry. Like, how is this even allowed? Like, this absolutely makes no sense. But then when I started doing research and finding out the loopholes that, buildings can get through, and then even recently, like when I was working for a nonprofit and I was planning summer trips for my students, and a lot of my students like to go Northeast, and I would be contacting these schools about dorms for students to stay during the summer. And my experience literally made me start asking them, like, okay, but like, you have 3 floors, but like, you don't have an elevator. And they're like, yeah, the building is so old, like, it's not required. And I'm like, okay, but like, we have a student that needs an elevator, or like, so like, how is that going to work? And then they would be like, well, I guess you have to stay on the first floor, but like, it costs extra. I'm like, well, it's not going to cost us extra because it's not our fault. Like, so like, we won't be staying on the third floor. We'll be staying on the first floor. And so while I know that that's just like a small portion of an experience that I had, that doesn't equate to people that experience this like every day of their life, I do feel like that has made me cognizant when I am, working with students and planning things like college tours and talking to families.
I'm so impressed because when I asked you, I was like, oh, I should have been more specific because I just asked you about access and you came back with, and I thought, okay, well, she'll just think about like the wheelchair of it all because that's
Mhm,
usually
mhm.
where it goes, like mobility. You
Yeah.
came back with neurodivergence. You came back with depression. You came back with mental health. And it was beautifully put out. Like it was so easy for me. And I'm so bad at like data. And you gave me all the data in a way I could easily see it. My question for you is when you did all this research, which, oh my God, that was research. You are good at research. I thought I was good. Not even close. Is there anything that surprised you or stood out for you when you were doing this research?
I'm not gonna lie, and I like to be transparent. I think what stood out to me was like the cost piece of it. So one, realizing like not every college had this right. Two, how long it would like took to find the information. Like it wasn't always, it's not posted on like the front page of every school. And then the schools that did have like very niche programs, like I'm not gonna lie, like some of them were like pretty expensive schools. Like I pride myself on like prioritizing affordability for the families that I work with. And so when I was putting this resource together, I had to be very upfront. And you'll see my resource that I put notations of like premium level and then
Yep.
like
You
affordable.
even broke it down by cost.
Yes, because I don't want people to be deceived into thinking like, oh, I finally found a resource that like is gonna apply to me, and then they get disappointed when they find out the cost. So I wanted to be really upfront about that to allow families to like have those conversations with the schools to figure out like, okay, what kind of aid do they provide? So I do think that surprised me. But then I also was just surprised also about how much information there was. Like I was able to pull like over 50 schools from the different ranges. And honestly, when I first started, I thought the list was going to be a lot smaller than that. So it's just the fact that this is out there and literally people don't know. And like I would think about all the conversations I had prior to this, especially with like seniors and juniors, and like the parents would just be like, well, I'm just so worried about my kid. Like, I don't know. And because of their concern, like they'll be like, well, they're just going to go to like a 2-year, which is fine. Like if that's what you really want. But the decision on the front end, because of their limiting belief of like, this doesn't exist, is like one of the things I was like, oh no, like we definitely have to put this out.
I love that you also mentioned community college. I'm a huge advocate for it because
Mhm.
it can save you so much money. In the state
Yeah,
I'm at, it's free. So it's literally cutting our college costs in half. But the
yeah,
reason I reached out to you is we're looking at we're going to need this is a child who wants to move on to a
yeah.
bachelor's and a master's and possibly a PhD. So we're going to need that eventually. Thank you for mentioning that. Were there any colleges that really stood out to you as being especially good at this?
Yeah, so in the resource, I end up spotlighting kind of like the top 5 or 6 that were supportive of students across multiple disciplines, right? So like for one of the ones I have is like Landmark, and I also prioritized acceptance rate when I was picking these spotlights, because it's one thing for the school to have all these things and then be very highly selective, because that's not accessible, right? So the ones that I highlighted, like Landmark College has a 44% acceptance rate. And then we have University of Denver with the 80% acceptance rate, which I think people would be very surprised about University of Denver because it's a big public university and they're usually discussed and talked about for other things, but people really don't know the programs they have for autism, supporting students with executive functions, ADHD. So I think that was a really big one that I was surprised about. Even Drexel University being a private university, but still having like that 27% acceptance rate. And the fact that, again, they support students with learning disabilities like dyslexia, autism. Those ones really stood out to me. Another really big one that people are going to be surprised about, University of Arizona. So we talk about University of Arizona for so much other stuff, but they literally have an 85% acceptance rate, and that is like a really big access factor. And they have 91% of financial aid that they offer to people who need it. So those were some of the really big ones that I wanted to make sure that I highlighted, because sometimes when you look at a list and you see a lot of private schools, you're like, okay, well, this is not going to be, I can't afford this. So I really wanted to pinpoint those publics that people have in their community, but may not realize like, oh, this school has this resource for me.
Were there any resources that you found that you're like, that was cool? I didn't even know that was a possibility.
So some schools have like full blown programs in the school that I was like, oh wow. So like one of the schools, they have it's let me hold on, make sure I pronounce it. Hofstra University has this program called PALS, and it's like a PALS program, and you can apply to it separately through the student access program. And I did see some other schools that had programs that were very unique and niche, but then they were like an additional cost, which I was like, I don't really know how I feel about that. But those were actually very surprising. Hofstra University helps families, public in the Northeast. They have open availability and enrollment. So that was like another big thing that I appreciated. Another really good one was Lynn University. And Lynn University, they have another special program called the IAL, which is called the Institute for Achievement and Learning. That unfortunately is one of the ones that's like an additional fee. But again, I wanted to put it there in case families just are in that bracket and that's a resource that they want to offer their student. So those are some of the ones that are like, oh yeah, they have like specialized programs on their campuses. And then some of the ones that didn't get spotlighted, I saw a lot of universities that offered specialized classes. So they would have like smaller classes. There were some that offered like learning in different styles, which I also think is a really big deal for the neurodivergent community. And I really like the ones that also like supported with executive functioning. Like they have universities that have full programs related around like organization, chunking, breaking down assignments, which are things that a lot of ADHD students struggle with, which when students get to college, it's just kind of like, oh, well, they're growing now. Like, they should already know how to do this. And so a lot of the colleges offer that executive functioning support, which I think is important.
So, as parents or as a student, what are some of the red flags we should watch out for when we're looking for a place to be?
In general, I think that if you can't get your questions answered right, so there's 5 factors that I take into consideration to be included in this guide, and they are visibility. So like, how easy was it for me to find the information and understand it? Does the college offer basic baseline accommodations, right? So like, is there an accommodations office? Like, how much support are students getting based on their accommodations? I also looked at like, is it easy for a student to submit their paperwork? How long does it take for them to actually get access after submission? I also considered environment as well, because campus size in relation to services has to make sense. And then cost is always like another big one. So those are the 5, like, how easy is it to get access to people and information? Because you're continually going to be having to ask for support and follow up. The environment, you also need to care about where you're going, the feel. How does it feel? Is it too big or too small? Like the college I went to, it takes 15 minutes to get across campus in a bus. So you probably want to consider that if you're a student that has a physical mobility disability, because what happens if it's raining and then the van can't take you or there's a shortage? Like, think about that. And then cost. Obviously, cost is a really big one. You want to know upfront, like, what is your budget? You want to reach out to colleges ahead of time. That's why I always talk about early preparation. So if you are a student that has a disability and you get this resource and you're in freshman year, you can still start now to start narrowing down that list and figuring out how much do we need to save or budget for to attend this university that I now know has all the things that I need to be successful.
I'm just realizing, did I hear you right that they were going to charge more for a accessible room than they were for a 3rd floor?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. It's just like my coffee was just starting to kick in. I'm like that.
Yeah. I mean, obviously convenience is like, it's like kind of like with the hotels, right? Like the floors that are like the most premium and like near the amenities cost more. And so at the time, I'm not going to say the name of the university, but at the time they have multiple programs there. So like they already had a program that was like staying on the 1st floor and we were supposed to stay on the 3rd floor. And I was just like, well, you don't have any elevators and we're gonna be carrying luggages to the 3rd floor, and, like, I can't comprehend it, to be quite frank. I have a lot of issues with the whole thing about, like, buildings being too old to be ADA accessible. I think it's a cop out. I don't think it makes sense, and I think you need to figure it out and build an elevator or build a ramp. I don't know. We need to figure it out. Like, I just can't.
It's already been figured out. I went to Italy. I went and visited the Etruscan ruins, and they had built into the ruins where the you wheel
A
into a little
lift or
circle,
something,
and it
like,
lifts you up. There are buildings that are in the 15th century in England that I went to where it was built into the stairs. The stairs would collapse down flat. I'd wheel in, and then it would go up, and then the stairs would appear. Like, they figured it out for incredibly old buildings. This is such BS. Sorry.
yeah,
I will get off my soapbox.
no, I 100%
I
agree.
keep jumping on it. And so I wanted to ask you, what do you think is broken in college admissions, especially as we're like, I'm thinking about this just from a viewpoint of we see what we've been taught to see. So if you're someone who's been disabled and maybe your family is not used to going to college, you don't have that history of families being in college, you weren't told that was your future, you're put in
Yeah.
special ed, it's going to be very hard for someone like that to see this as a possibility. What do you think is broken in the system? How do we get more kids who are thrown into special ed to realize that there is so much that can be done in their lives? I'm someone who's in bed 70% of my life, and I still live a really happy, big life.
Yeah.
So what do we do to help these kids and adults realize that there's a future forward for them, even if they're not seeing it?
I think the number one thing, and it doesn't start off in college, but I think the support that students get K through 12 plays a really big factor in how they view the possibilities of colleges. So as a previous high school teacher, I have had students who have had IEPs and have had disabilities, and the way the students were treated across classes was very differing, right? One student can be performing very well in one class because the student is empowering them and, meeting their needs and being flexible, and others are not. And I think that if a student has too much of that negative experience, it shapes their view of college into thinking like this is going to be possible or not. I also think that parent advocacy is another big part. Like, parents are not being empowered or being led to feel like their child is limited. A physical limitation does not necessarily mean a cognitive one, right? Sometimes parents are not empowered, or they have too much time and they're just assuming that the school is acting on the best interest of their child, which from my experience and having sat in a lot of meetings for accommodations, that is not always the case. So that alone already sets up the trajectory of whether the student is going to even think about college as a avenue. Then the second thing I kind of talked about at the beginning is like positioning and perspective. So like you said, right? Like, you have this disability, but you're living like a very valuable life because you've like attached yourself to a greater purpose than the disability that you have. So having that conversation with students of like, yes, this is an experience that you're having, but in the reality, it is still just a small portion of your life. And it's not to downplay the impact or the experience or the pain, but it is to say that there's still other opportunities and other ways to move forward. And then college admissions in general, it's becoming more of like a very elite space. Where these kind of conversations are not happening. Like, when you're seeing all these webinars about getting into the Ivies and everything, nobody talks about, well, what does Harvard offer for people with disabilities? Or what does Penn or Yale? Like, nobody ever talks about that. I'm not saying they don't have it, but I'm just saying, like, in these commercials and stuff, that's not what they're advertising. So, like, naturally, as a kid, you're going to be like, well, I don't know if that is attainable for me.
Also, I just wanted to bring in a few other concepts. I guess coffee is still not in, folks. I'm sorry. I'm doing my best. But I'm thinking about college admissions just from watching all the kids around my child go through this, and how, number one, expensive it was. To apply was way out of the line of, like, especially if you're applying to multiple schools, that was an insane cost to the SATs. And my child finally came up with the idea of, I can't do that. My child could not sit up in a classroom and take a test for 4 hours. That was not a physical ability, and it was extremely expensive. And then also, we have teenagers who are heads of households who might not be able to get off work for that time for a test. They might not have the computer to do this, or the computer literacy. Like, the accessibility isn't just disability. That's what I'm trying to get to. It's also a
Yeah.
matter of, can a student sit up and take a test for this long? Can a family afford, I think it was like almost $200 for the SATs, and there was a wait list.
So accessibility is a really big factor. I would say that For applications, for college applications, the Common App is like the main application that students use to apply to multiple colleges. If your family qualifies for Pell or free or reduced lunch, then you can qualify for fee waivers for universities. And you can also reach out to universities directly and ask for fee waivers, and they will offer you fee waiver codes to use for college applications. And then if you sign up for a mailing list for certain colleges, they will let you know like, oh, this is the free week for applying. So those are options that students have. But honestly, if you don't qualify,
I've never heard of any of this, by the way. And we went through
yeah.
this with
And
college.
then there's another organization called NACAC, NACAC. Their college access program, and they also offer additional waivers. So I use their waivers, and I applied to 8 colleges for free, but I didn't know about them. It was only because my cousin told me. So they also offer waivers for students to apply to colleges. As far as the testing, if you get a waiver for college applications, it automatically qualifies you for SAT waivers. So you can contact College Board and tell them like, oh, I need a waiver, or you can talk to your school counselor. And also NACAC and some other college access programs offer waivers for testing. So that's another way. And then as far as like, I don't have an answer about the actual physical component of like, I don't have the physical capability to sit for 4 to 5 hours. I think right now, and I talk about this on some of my posts of like, right now, the standard solution for students with disabilities is like, oh, just give them extended time. But it's like, if I can't sit up for 5 hours, if you give me 8 hours, it doesn't make a difference. So the only thing I can say for that is there are some colleges that are still test optional and have committed to being test optional for the remainder of the time. And so if I was working with a student, I would tell them that that would be the route to go would be the test optional route where they don't have to sit for that test. And some schools will allow you to replace your SAT with like maybe like an AP test or like some other form. But it really would just go back to advocacy of like contacting the school of like, hey, I see that this is a but this is my physical limitation. This is my documentation. Like, what are the alternatives? Which I don't think a lot of people do. And colleges do not want to be the ones to be like, oh, well, this student asked for, and I said no. That's not going to be a good look. But I just really think people are not asking. So
Again, I think we're back to like, we don't know what we can't see. Everything you're telling me, I even like talked to college counselors before we chose the community college route. No one mentioned any of this. So I am so happy we're talking. Are there things that you feel that the admissions departments should be looking at that they're not?
in what context?
In any, like, we know that they're looking for like good grades. We know they're looking for extracurriculars. Are there things that you wish they would look at as well that they're not? That's a blind spot for them.
Well, I can't speak for every school is different. I mean, I've been fortunate to be connected to schools that do look at the whole picture, but then I've also worked with schools that were very just grade based. I mean, I would just say that I hope that eventually at some point colleges will get to a point where they're doing holistic admissions, where they are looking at the entire context. And I also hope that they get to a point where they're resourced enough to be able to have more time to have these conversations, because in their defense, there's a limited number of them and a limited amount of funding that they have to do what they're trying to do. So hope more resources, more access, more conversations, more time to actually sit down with families to even answer all of these questions. Is things that I hope that eventually they'll be able to do.
What do you think are some blind spots that caregivers and students have when they're looking at a university? I remember reading about you saying that people need to choose with strategy, not feeling.
Yeah, so a lot of times people have already decided where they're going to end up before they've considered all the factors, because my daddy went there, or it's like a generational thing, and they're not paying attention to the reality of where they are. So like with my previous example, I went to a really big school, over 40,000 students. And so that type of university would probably not be the best fit for a student with mobility issues, just because of the fact of, like I said, even if I say I'm going to depend on the van services, what if they're not available one day? What if it's raining? Like, I would need to be more realistic, and maybe I'll consider a smaller school. You know, like those are the things that people don't always think about. I also think that sometimes caregivers downplay the difficulty of college, right? So college is a high level commitment, and it does require high level thinking, and it's just going to be hard. Like, it's going to be challenging. And so having those conversations of like, what will we do when we get to this point? what is our Richter scale of us knowing like, okay, we will have to take a step back or take a break? Like, are we putting those interventions and plans into place so that if I see the decline, even if my student doesn't see the decline, I see it? Like, what's going to be our safe word to know, like, we need to take a step back? I don't think that people think about that times. I think it's just like, oh my gosh, I got in, I got the scholarship, and that's just going to be all great. And that's not necessarily the case because imagine you're a new student in college, you're dealing with the imposter syndrome of like this major transition along with the disability that you have. That's just like a duality that a lot of people don't talk about.
I cannot thank you enough for all of that. Very, very clear empathy and understanding. I had interviewed someone before COVID who had left a very important education opportunity where she was going to a school in Montreal, I believe, or upstate New York. And they told her that, oh, well, we can't get the snowplows out. You're just going to miss winter semester. There was nothing that would happen. Also, when we're talking about health, I just want to throw this out there because I just read an article about a university in Tennessee that their dorm rooms have black mold. So as we're talking about all of this stuff and we're talking about civilian access, I think it's really important we understand how old these dorm rooms are
Yeah, they're
and make
old.
sure that, yeah, and make sure that your student isn't going to end up with a disability. These kids are going to end up with long-term lung scarring. So, we also might want to look at future disability issues as well.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. The dorms are old and there's a lot of questionable things that happen in the very old dorms. Like, so you need to consider all things,
All
and
the things.
yeah, all the things. You need to take that into consideration. Yeah, that's all I'm
Now,
gonna say.
before I let you go, because I know you have other commitments, but do you also work with disabled adults like myself who might be thinking about going back to college and are looking at maybe, our careers are not working for us physically anymore and now we need to retrain? Do you work with people who are grown-ups?
Yeah, so I mean, I don't provide career guidance. So like if you were trying to switch careers, I don't feel comfortable to say like, oh, I can provide you career advising. But if you were an adult and you were saying like, oh, I have identified, I know I want to go back to school and obviously need to go through the application process for that, then I can obviously provide support with that, with your statement, putting together your story, pulling your transcript together. Like I provide support in that. And I'm happy to provide recommendations of where non-traditional adults are attending and thriving at, which is becoming more common these days. I think I just read an article recently where like the age of like students going back to school is like increasing and the numbers are increasing. And it's funny because I also recently wrote about like how there's this thing called the enrollment demographic cliff where like we're at the point in education where like there's about to be like a decline in high school to college enrollment due to like the 2008 recession and people stopped having kids. So that's like a whole nother conversation. So I just think it's interesting that from the high school to college and we're predicting a decline in enrollment, but then we're seeing an increase in enrollment of like non-traditional adult learners who are going back to school. So that's going to be interesting thing to see in the next few years.
So my last question is, how do we get this guide into every high school? Because this is something that every high school counselor should have on their desk.
I don't know. I mean, I'm not here to say, I mean, I have taught public charter. I've been around and I
Do we
know
call
that,
principals? Like, how do we as a community support this? Because I
I
know
mean,
that every parent wants this in.
I can't speak for the districts because from my experience, I know that there is a lot of political red tape that comes with districts. Like they have their own priorities. And so I'm not going to sit here and be like, yeah, if we just call the principal.
Don't bug principals. Okay, fair enough.
So I'm just focusing on families, right? So as a family, if you get this guide, then you can take it to your counselor and be like, well, I found this thing. Like, how can we, use it in the student's homeroom class or something? So I think if we start with families bringing it up, then eventually it could lead to like bigger systems, making use of it. So
Okay, now before any agents or anyone gets excited about this, I never do this. I'm only doing this for this one person, for this one thing. Please let us know how we buy this because I do get agents talking to me all the time. I don't take your people. I'm sorry, I'm only one person here. Do not ask me to sell things. I will not do it. This is the only time. So please tell us how do we buy this because I need it yesterday.
yeah, so you can find my guide on my website, MMERIscholars.org. And you can find it in all the bios of all my social media platforms, which is also the same name. You can find them on there. I definitely encourage you to email me if you want the direct link to the guide or if you have questions. And that's also at hello@MMERIscholars.org. If you find me on social media or message me on my website, you can have access to my guide as well. And I don't know exactly how your podcast works, but I can give you the link to drop, I guess, in your description or something, as well as your um, coupon code, which will be invisible, not broken, which will give you your $10 off as well.
And if you go to Invisible Not Broken on our show notes on our website, invisiblenotbroken.com, we will have all the links right there. And I cannot recommend following Elle enough. Like, please go follow. I think you have like a weekly free college thing. Like you
Yeah.
weekly.
So every week I highlight colleges that are providing like 100% need met for low income families, which is ultimately increasing access. And the major thing behind that, I call it Full Ride Fridays, is that I really just want to bring to awareness other colleges besides the same 20 that we always hear about, so that families understand that there are other options out there, especially if you are first gen or low income family who has never considered college and just automatically assumed you cannot afford it. That is not the case. You actually can afford it, and my students are proof of that.
I cannot wait to have you back on. You have already said you'll come back, right?
Yes, absolutely.
I cannot thank you for everything you did and are continuing to do. Please go follow immediately. You will not be sorry. There's so much good information. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Everyone, be kind, be gentle, be fierce. This is the last month I am doing like more than one episode. I am not doing this again. I'm so sorry, everyone. I cannot keep up. So that's me being gentle to myself. I am being fierce by holding my own boundaries, and I'm being kind to myself by doing what I need to do. So there you have it. Have a great month, everyone.
Thank you so much.